A rusted 1968 Ford F100 sat rotting in the driveway, a joke to the entire family. But when Madeline finally pried open the jammed dashboard, she didn't find mice or old receipts. She found a secret that would tear her family apart and make her a millionaire overnight. The mahogany-paneled office of Abernathy and Associates smelled of lemon polish, stale coffee, and simmering greed. Madeline Hayes sat near the back of the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. The leather chair squeaked beneath her, a sharp contrast to the suffocating silence that had fallen over the room, as the lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat. Across from her sat her Aunt Caroline and her cousin, Jasper. Caroline was a woman who wore her wealth like a weapon. Draped in a tailored charcoal blazer that cost more than Madeline's car, she tapped a manicured fingernail against the glass table, her eyes darting impatiently to the grandfather clock in the corner. Jasper, 24 and perpetually smirking, was busy scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging the gravity of the day. They were here for the reading of Henry Caldwell's will. Grandpa Henry had been a fixture in Madeline's life, the only one, in fact. When her own parents had died in a car accident 15 years ago, it was Henry who took her in. He was a quiet, rugged man with grease permanently stained into the creases of his knuckles. He ran a small, struggling mechanic shop on the edge of Oakhaven, Oregon, and lived in a sprawling, dilapidated farmhouse that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. Caroline, Henry's only living daughter, had abandoned the farm decades ago, marrying a wealthy real estate developer and moving to the city. She only visited Henry when she needed a loan, or, in his final years, to survey the property with the calculating eyes of a vulture waiting for its meal. "Let us proceed," Mr. Abernathy said, adjusting his half-moon spectacles. "I will read the stipulations as requested by the deceased, Mr. Henry James Caldwell." Caroline sat up straighter, a triumphant gleam in her eye. She had already hired contractors to bulldoze the farmhouse and subdivide the 70 acres of land. "To my daughter, Caroline," the lawyer read, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "I leave the Oakhaven estate, including the farmhouse and the surrounding 70 acres of land, on the condition that all outstanding property taxes are settled by her estate." Caroline let out a soft, satisfied sigh. Jasper didn't even look up from his phone. "To my grandson, Jasper, I leave the contents of my Charles Schwab investment portfolio to be dispersed immediately upon my passing." "Wait, what portfolio?" Caroline interrupted, her brow furrowing. "My father was a mechanic. He didn't have a stock portfolio." "Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, your father made several astute investments in the late 1980s. The portfolio is currently valued at roughly $450,000, Mr. Abernathy replied mildly. Jasper's head snapped up, his phone slipping from his hands and clattering onto the carpet. $450 grand? You're kidding." "I assure you I am not." Caroline's smile widened into a beaming, predatory grin. The old man had hoarded cash while living like a pauper. It was a windfall they hadn't expected. Madeline felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't care about the money or the land. She just missed the scent of motor oil and peppermint that always lingered on her grandfather's plaid flannel shirts. She missed their quiet evenings, sitting on the porch, listening to the crickets. "And finally," Mr. Abernathy continued, his eyes shifting toward Madeline with a hint of unreadable sympathy, "to my granddaughter, Madeline Hayes, you were the light of my twilight years, kiddo. I leave you the 1968 Ford F100, currently parked in the north barn. Treat her well, and she'll take you where you need to go." Silence stretched across the room. Then Caroline laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a loud, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "The truck? He left you the rusted-out junker in the barn?" Jasper snickered, leaning back in his chair. "Oh man, Maddie, don't spend it all in one place. You might be able to get, what, $200 in scrap metal for that thing? Assuming the tow truck driver doesn't charge you $300 to haul it away." Madeline's face burned. She stared at the floor, fighting the prickling sensation of tears in her eyes. It wasn't the lack of money that hurt. It was the public humiliation. "That truck meant a lot to him," Madeline said quietly, her voice trembling just a fraction. "It's an eyesore," Caroline snapped, her amusement turning instantly to disdain. "It hasn't run in 20 years. The floorboards are rusted through, and it smells like a family of raccoons died in the upholstery. I want it off my property by the end of the week, Madeline. If it's not gone by Friday, I'm calling the scrapyard myself." Mr. Abernathy frowned. "Mrs. Caldwell, there is a grace period for the removal of inherited—" "Friday," Caroline repeated, standing up and smoothing her blazer. "Come along, Jasper. We have an estate to liquidate." As they swept out of the office, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in their wake, Madeline remained seated. She felt hollowed out. Grandpa Henry had loved that truck. He used to sit in the driver's seat with her when she was 7, letting her steer the massive wheel while he made engine noises, telling her stories of driving it across the country before she was born. But as she grew older, the truck had been relegated to the barn, covered in a tarp, slowly surrendering to time and rust. Why had he left it to her? Why single out a piece of rotting metal while giving the rest of the family the actual wealth? 2 days later, Madeline paid $300, a significant chunk of her meager savings from her waitress job, to have the Ford F-100 towed to her apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. When the flatbed dropped the truck into her assigned parking space, her neighbors peeked out from behind their blinds. The truck was a monstrosity. The original sky blue paint was entirely consumed by a cancerous, flaking orange rust. One of the headlights was smashed, the tires were dry rotted and flat, and the bed was filled with damp leaves and empty oil quarts. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Jasper. "Saw the tow truck pass by the cafe. Nice ride. Don't forget to update your tetanus shots." Madeline shoved the phone back into her pocket, tears of frustration finally spilling over. She grabbed a bucket, a scrub brush, and a bottle of heavy-duty cleaner. If this was the only thing she had left of the man who raised her, she was going to at least make it look respectable. Saturday morning brought a heavy, unrelenting drizzle that washed the city in shades of grey. Madeline stood in the parking lot in her oversized overalls, soaked to the bone, battling the grime inside the cab of the F-100. The interior was in even worse shape than the exterior. The springs of the bench seat poked through the cracked vinyl like broken bones. The dashboard was coated in a thick, sticky layer of dust, and the entire cabin smelled faintly of gasoline, damp earth, and decay. She spent 3 hours just clearing out the trash, old spark plugs, brittle diner receipts from 1982, and a rusted tire iron. Exhausted and shivering, she sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her grandfather sitting next to her. But all she felt was the cold reality of her current life. 26, barely making rent, and mocked by the only family she had left. "Treat her well, and she'll take you where you need to go," she whispered aloud, repeating his words from the will. Frustration boiled over. She slammed her hand hard against the dashboard. "Where, Grandpa? To the scrapyard?" The force of her strike jarred the heavy metal dashboard. A strange metallic clack echoed in the small cabin. Madeline froze. She looked down. The glove compartment, which had been rusted shut and entirely unyielding when she tried to pry it open earlier, had popped open about half an inch. Curiosity replacing her anger, she wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled. It resisted with a harsh screech of metal on metal, then suddenly gave way, dropping open to reveal a hollow, dusty cavity. It was entirely empty. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Of course, but as she reached in to wipe away the dust, her knuckles brushed against the back wall of the compartment. It wasn't solid steel like the rest of the dash. It felt like thick, hardened plastic, and it rattled. Madeline grabbed her flashlight from her cleaning bucket and shined it inside. The back panel of the glove box was a false wall. There were no screws, but there was a tiny, barely visible sliding latch in the upper left corner. Her heart began to pound, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. With a trembling finger, she pushed the latch. It was stiff, fighting her, until it finally gave way with a sharp snap. The false back fell forward, revealing a hidden recess deep within the firewall of the truck. Inside the recess sat a heavy, dark green canvas pouch, tightly bound with a thick leather strap. Madeline carefully pulled it out. It was surprisingly heavy, weighing perhaps 10 or 15 pounds. She placed it on the passenger seat, her breath catching in her throat. The leather strap was dry and cracked, breaking apart in her hands as she struggled to untie the knot. When she finally pulled the canvas open, the smell of old paper and copper filled the air. Inside were 3 things. First, a stack of heavily stamped passports, all bearing Henry Caldwell's face, but none bearing his name. One identified him as Arthur Pendleton, another as Thomas Croft. The stamps spanned the globe: Geneva, Zurich, Vienna, Moscow, and Buenos Aires, all dated between 1971 and 1978. Madeline stared at the photos. It was her grandfather, looking rugged and dangerous in his 30s, a stark contrast to the gentle mechanic she had known. Second, there was a thick, leather-bound ledger. Madeline opened it, her eyes skimming the handwritten entries. It was filled with lists of names, dates, and massive dollar amounts, all written in her grandfather's meticulous cursive. Next to several names were terrifying annotations: asset recovered, target neutralized, or bribe delivered, file closed. Her grandfather wasn't just a mechanic. He had been involved in something deeply covert, deeply lucrative, and incredibly dangerous. But it was the third item that made her heart stop. Beneath the ledger was a large, flat, velvet-lined jeweler's box. Madeline pried the brass clasp open. The dim, rainy light of the parking lot caught the contents, refracting into 1,000 dazzling, brilliant colors. Nestled in the velvet were dozens of uncut stones, diamonds the size of marbles, deep blue sapphires, and rubies that looked like crystallized blood. Alongside the gems lay 3 solid gold bars, each stamped with the insignia of a Swiss bank that Madeline didn't recognize, but whose weight in her hands told her everything she needed to know. She was holding a fortune, a massive, undeniable fortune. Maddie. Madeline jumped nearly out of her skin, slamming the jeweler's box shut and throwing the canvas bag onto the floorboards, kicking a dirty rag over it, just as a sharp tap hit the driver's side window. She whipped her head around. Standing in the rain, holding a massive golf umbrella, was Aunt Caroline. Madeline rolled down the window halfway, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip her knees to steady them. "Aunt Caroline, what are you doing here?" Caroline looked out of place in the run-down apartment parking lot, her designer trench coat practically glowing against the grim backdrop. She looked past Madeline, her sharp eyes scanning the interior of the truck with an intensity that sent a chill down Madeline's spine. "I was in the neighborhood," Caroline lied smoothly, her voice overly sweet. "I came to apologize, dear. I was harsh at the lawyer's office. Grief makes us act in ways we aren't proud of." It's fine," Madeline stammered, hyper-aware of the canvas bag hidden beneath the rag just inches from her boots. "Listen," Caroline said, leaning closer to the window. "I've been thinking about this old eyesore. I know it has sentimental value to you, but the truth is, you can't afford to restore it. It's just going to rack up fines sitting in this parking lot. I'll do you a favor. I'll give you $5,000 for it right now. Cash." Madeline stared at her. $5,000 for a rusted truck that Jasper had valued at $200 in scrap? "Why would you want it?" Madeline asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. Caroline's smile tightened, just a fraction. "For the farm, of course. I thought I might use it as a decorative planter. A rusty chic sort of thing, near the new subdivision entrance." It was a lie. A blatant, desperate lie. Madeline remembered how Caroline had treated Henry, how she had practically spat on his memory just 2 days ago. And now she was offering a massive overpayment for a truck she despised. She knows, Madeline realized with a sickening jolt. She knows there's something in the truck. "I appreciate the offer, Aunt Caroline," Madeline said, carefully rolling the window up a few inches. "But Grandpa left it to me. I'm going to keep it." Caroline's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, venomous rage. She grabbed the edge of the glass, stopping it from rolling up further. "Don't be a fool, Madeline," Caroline hissed, her voice dropping into a menacing whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. That old man stole something that belongs to my husband. If you find it, it won't bring you anything but misery. Sell me the truck." "Let go of my window," Madeline said, her fear suddenly giving way to a fierce, protective anger. She turned the ignition crank to the battery setting and hit the automatic window switch. The glass forced Caroline's manicured fingers away. Caroline stepped back into the rain, her eyes blazing. "You're making a massive mistake, you little brat. I'm not leaving here without what's mine." As Caroline marched back to her idling Mercedes across the street, Madeline locked the truck doors. Her hands were shaking violently as she pulled the rag off the canvas bag. Her grandfather hadn't just left her an inheritance. He had left her a war. Madeline didn't wait to see if Caroline would double back. She shoved the heavy canvas bag, the ledger, and the jeweler's box into her faded canvas backpack, her hands slick with rain and nervous sweat. She abandoned her cleaning supplies in the mud, locked the rusted door of the F-100, and sprinted up the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment. Once inside, she locked the deadbolt, threw the chain, and collapsed against the front door, gasping for air. The dim light of her tiny living room cast long, unsettling shadows. She dumped the contents of the backpack onto her cheap laminate coffee table. The gold bars hit the wood with a heavy, authoritative thud. The diamonds and rubies scattered across the velvet box, catching the glow of her cheap floor lamp. It was a king's ransom sitting in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment that smelled of burnt toast and cheap laundry detergent. But it was the ledger that drew her attention. Madeline made a cup of black tea to stop her hands from shaking, wrapped herself in a blanket, and opened the leather-bound book. The early pages, dated in the 1970s, read like a sea thriller. Coded drops in Berlin, extraction coordinates in South America, and payments from foreign entities. Her grandfather, Henry Caldwell, had been a retrieval specialist. He specialized in recovering stolen assets for private, highly secretive clients. But as she flipped to the final quarter of the book, the dates shifted to the late 1990s and early 2000s. The global locations vanished, replaced by local addresses: Oak Haven, Oregon; Portland; Seattle. And then she saw it. Victor Harrington, Aunt Caroline's husband. Madeline read the entries, her blood running cold. Victor wasn't just a wealthy real estate developer. He was the architect of a ruthless, illegal land grab syndicate. According to Henry's meticulous notes, Victor had been systematically defrauding elderly landowners, using shell companies to force them into foreclosure, and then buying their land for pennies on the dollar. Henry had discovered his son-in-law's syndicate when Victor tried to target the Caldwell farm. Instead of going to the police, who Victor likely had in his pocket, Henry had come out of retirement. The ledger detailed how Henry had tracked Victor's illicit profits, intercepted a massive payoff from a corrupt foreign contractor, and stolen the untraceable assets: 3 Swiss gold bars and a collection of conflict-free gems intended to be laundered through the black market. At the bottom of the last page, Henry had written a final note, the ink slightly faded. "Victor knows I took it, but he can't prove it without exposing his own empire. I've hidden the insurance policy in the only place they'd never look, a truck they're too arrogant to value. Madeline, if you are reading this, I am gone. Do not trust Caroline. Take the ledger to William Dempsey at the Gemological Institute of America, GIA, lab in Carlsbad. He owes me his life. He will broker the stones and protect you." A loud, violent pounding on her apartment door shattered the silence. Madeline dropped the ledger. The teacup rattled on the saucer. "Madeline, open this door right now." It was a man's voice, deep, furious, and dripping with authority. "Victor." She crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. Victor Harrington stood in the hallway, his expensive tailored suit dripping with rain, his face flushed red with rage. Behind him stood a large, expressionless man in a dark windbreaker. "Muscle, I know you found it," Victor hissed through the wood, his voice dropping to a menacing pitch. "Caroline told me you were acting strange. Open the door, or my associate will take it off its hinges. You don't want to play this game, little girl." Panic flared in Madeline's chest, but as she looked back at the table, at the fortune her grandfather had bled to protect, at the undeniable proof of Victor's crimes, the fear morphed into a cold, hard resolve. She wasn't just a broke waitress anymore. She was Henry Caldwell's granddaughter. She quickly swept the gold, the gems, and the ledger back into her backpack. She slung it over her shoulders, grabbed her fire escape key, and bolted for the kitchen window. As the front door groaned under a massive, splintering kick from Victor's associate, Madeline slipped out into the stormy night, scrambling down the rusted iron stairs into the dark alley below. 3 days later, the rain had finally cleared, leaving the city washed clean under a brilliant blue sky. Madeline sat in the exact same leather chair in the mahogany-paneled office of Abernathy and Associates. Her posture, however, was entirely different. She sat straight, her shoulders squared, projecting a calm confidence she hadn't possessed a week ago. Across from her, Caroline and Victor looked completely unraveled. Caroline's usual immaculate hair was slightly disheveled, and the dark circles under Victor's eyes betrayed sleepless nights of frantic searching. Jasper was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Abernathy looked between the three of them, clearly uncomfortable with the palpable tension in his office. "Madeline, you requested this emergency meeting. You stated it was a matter regarding the estate." "Yes, Mr. Abernathy," Madeline said smoothly. She reached into her sleek new leather tote bag, purchased with a small cash advance arranged by William Dempsey in California, and pulled out a thick manila folder. "You little thief," Victor snarled, leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the glass table. "You have no idea the fire you're playing with. Give it back." "Give what back, Victor?" Madeline asked, tilting her head with a polite, innocent smile. "The rusted truck?" "You know exactly what," Caroline spat, dropping her wealthy socialite facade entirely. "That money belongs to us." "Actually," Madeline said, opening the folder, "it belongs to the people you defrauded. But since they can't be easily compensated without a massive federal investigation, it's going to serve as my grandfather's severance package." She slid a photocopied page of the ledger across the table. Victor looked at it, his face draining of all color. It was the page detailing his shell companies, the bribes paid to county judges, and the exact routing numbers of his offshore accounts. "Where did you get this?" Victor whispered, the bluster instantly vanishing from his voice. "Grandpa Henry was a very meticulous record keeper," Madeline said calmly. "I spent the last 2 days in Carlsbad, California. I met with a man named William Dempsey. He appraised the physical assets Grandpa left me, and he also authenticated these records. Right now, the original ledger, along with sworn affidavits, is sitting in a secure safety deposit box at Chase Bank in downtown Portland." Caroline looked at her husband, panic rising in her chest. "Victor, what is she talking about?" Madeline didn't let him answer. "Here is the deal. I keep the truck, and I keep everything that was inside it. You will never approach me, call me, or come near my property ever again. If I see either of you, or if anything happens to me, if I so much as trip on a sidewalk, William Dempsey has standing instructions to forward the original ledger to the FBI, the IRS, and the state prosecutor." The silence in the office was deafening. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to echo like gunshots. Victor swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the photocopied page. He was a predator, but he wasn't stupid. He knew when he had been outmaneuvered. "You think you're so smart," Caroline sneered, trying to salvage some scrap of pride. "Fine. Keep the dirty money. I still have the farm, the 70 acres, and Jasper's portfolio." Madeline couldn't help but smile. "About that, Mr. Abernathy, could you clarify the stipulation regarding Aunt Caroline's inheritance?" The lawyer adjusted his spectacles, looking bewildered but compliant. "Mrs. Caldwell inherits the estate on the condition that all outstanding property taxes are settled by her." "Exactly," Madeline said. She pulled a second document from her folder and slid it toward Caroline. Grandpa Henry didn't just hide assets. He also engaged in a bit of creative accounting to protect the land. He legally tied the farm's deed to one of Victor's defunct shell companies. The IRS audited that company 2 years ago. Caroline's eyes widened as she read the document. What does this mean?" "It means," Mr. Abernathy interjected, reading the paper over her shoulder, "that the property taxes and federal penalties attached to the Oakhaven estate currently total just over $6 million. By legally accepting the inheritance, Mrs. Caldwell, you have assumed responsibility for that debt." Caroline dropped the paper as if it had burned her. No, that's impossible, Victor." Victor didn't look at her. He buried his face in his hands, realizing that the old mechanic he had mocked for a decade had orchestrated his absolute ruin from the grave. Madeline stood up, smoothing her jacket. She felt lighter than she had in years. The heavy, oppressive shadow of her family's cruelty had finally been lifted. "If you'll excuse me," Madeline said, walking toward the door. "I have a mechanic waiting. I'm having a 1968 Ford F100 fully restored. I hear a fresh coat of sky blue paint does wonders for an old classic." She walked out into the bright city streets, leaving the ashes of Victor Harrington's empire behind her. Grandpa Henry had promised the truck would take her exactly where she needed to go. And looking at the boundless horizon ahead of her, Madeline knew he had been absolutely right. If Madeline's incredible journey from a mocked granddaughter to a millionaire mastermind left you speechless, hit that like button. Make sure to share this video with anyone